great hall smelled of fear. Not mine. I had no scent to betray me, but I could feel the terror radiating from the 50 women standing in a perfect line beside me. Their perfumes, jasmine, rose, vanilla, nightshade, collided into a suffocating cloud that drifted through the vaulted stone ceiling like slow poison. I stood at the very end of the row. That wasn't an accident. The elders had placed me there where the forgotten ones waited, where the broken ones were hidden until the ceremony ended and they could be quietly ushered out the back door into permanent exile. My name is Kira Ashwood, and I am the first she-wolf born without a scent in 200 years. The healers called it olfactory null, a polite way of saying what I really was, incomplete. A wolf without the most fundamental ability that defined our kind. Wolves communicated through scent. We marked our territory with it. We found our mates through it. Scent was the soul turned outward, made visible, made real. And I had none. My mother wept when the diagnosis was confirmed. I was 7 years old. I remember her kneeling in front of the healer's fire, hands pressed against her face, shoulders shaking. My father stood behind her, jaw tight, eyes distant. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence told me everything I needed to know. 3 months later, my father was dead. A rogue wolf attack during a routine patrol near the northern border. They brought his body back wrapped in wool, his face peaceful, as though death had been a relief. Perhaps it was. Perhaps dying was easier than raising a daughter who could never be whole. My mother remarried within the year. An alpha named Garrick, wealthy cold, a man who owned 3 silver mines in the eastern mountains and had no patience for weakness. He tolerated me barely. I became a shadow in my own home. A servant who happened to share blood with the woman who cooked his meals and warmed his bed. My sister Sarah, 3 years older, and blessed with a scent like wild honeysuckle, learned quickly to pretend I didn't exist. At first I thought it was cruelty. Later I understood. It was survival. Associating with me would have dragged her down, and Sarah had ambitions. She wanted a good match, a strong alpha, a life that didn't involve scrubbing floors or sleeping in the cold room above the kitchen. So I learned to be invisible. I worked in silence, ate alone, and spent my nights in the small loft that smelled of old wood and mice. And I watched. I watched the sky. For 15 years I studied the clouds, the wind, the way birds moved before a storm. I had no teachers, just observation. I learned that when the crows flew low and the air tasted of iron, snow would come within 12 hours. I learned that a ring around the moon meant frost by morning. I learned that if the wind shifted from west to north and the temperature dropped 3 degrees in an hour, a blizzard was building in the mountains. I mapped every path, every trail, every hidden route within 50 miles of our village. 89 maps drawn by hand on scraps of parchment I stole from Garrick's study. I told myself I was preparing to run, to disappear into the wilderness and live alone where no one could look at me with pity or disgust. But deep down, I knew I was preparing for something else. I just didn't know what. The night of the blind choice arrived like an executioner's blade. Inevitable. Final. The ceremony was ancient. Once every decade, the most powerful alphas in the realm gathered in the capital city of Noctara to choose their mates, but not through beauty or wealth or family name. No. The alphas wore blindfolds. They relied entirely on instinct, on the primal scent that whispered her only her. Romantic, the poets said. Sacred, the priests declared. Cruel, I thought, because if the sun rose and no alpha had chosen you, you were declared forgotten, sent to the mines, to the borderlands, to the places where wolves went to die slowly. Some said it was kinder to simply walk into the forest and never come back. I had already packed my bag. A wool cloak, a knife, a map, and a small pouch of dried meat. I would give the ceremony 2 hours. If no one chose me, and I knew no one would, I would slip out the servants' entrance and disappear into the Cascade forests. I had studied the trails. I knew where to go. The great hall was older than memory. Vaulted ceilings carved from gray stone, massive iron chandeliers hanging from thick chains, walls lined with the banners of every major pack in the Western Territories. Torches burned in iron sconces, casting long shadows that danced across the floor like restless spirits. 50 women stood in a line down the center of the hall, All of us dressed in simple white gowns, hair loose, no jewelry, no adornment. The ceremony demanded purity, neutrality, nothing that might influence an alpha's choice, except scent. I glanced down the row. I recognized a few faces. The daughter of a wealthy merchant, a healer's apprentice, a warrior's sister, all of them trembling, all of them desperate. The consequences of rejection were too terrible to contemplate, and then I saw her. Sarah. She stood 20 paces to my left spine, straight chin high, her honeysuckle scent so strong I could almost feel it even though I couldn't smell it. She didn't look at me. Not once. Her eyes were fixed straight ahead, focused on the massive oak doors at the far end of the hall. My chest tightened. I hadn't known she would be here. She hadn't told me. Of course she hadn't. Acknowledging me would have been a risk. What if an alpha noticed? What if they asked questions? What if her association with a scentless omega ruined her chances? The horns sounded, deep, bone-shaking tones that silenced every whisper in the hall. The first alpha entered. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hair the color of wet earth. A black silk blindfold covered his eyes. He walked slowly down the line, head tilted slightly, nostrils flaring with each breath. He stopped in front of a blonde woman near the center, inhaled deeply, paused, then moved on. Another alpha entered, then another. Each one repeated the same ritual. Slow walk, deep inhale, choose or move on. The line grew shorter, the air grew heavier. My numbness deepened. Lord Fenrir of the Northern Ridge chose the 12th woman, a red-haired omega who smelled of pine and smoke. He removed his blindfold, took her hand, and led her from the hall. The crowd murmured approval. A smaller alpha named Gareth stopped in front of me. He bent close, inhaled, and his brows knitted above his blindfold. He tilted his head, confused. Inhaled again. His mouth twisted into something between confusion and disgust. Empty, he murmured, just loud enough for the women beside me to hear. He kept walking. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. Don't cry. Not here. Not in front of them. More alphas came. Some ignored me completely, as though I were invisible even to their wolf senses. Some sniffed once and moved on faces blank. One actually laughed, a short, contemptuous exhale that made the woman beside me flinch. Hours passed. Dawn crept closer. Gray light began filtering through the stained glass windows high above, painting the stone floor in muted blues and golds. Of the 50 women, only 7 remained, including me. I had started mentally calculating the distance to the tree line when the horn sounded again, but this time the tone was different, lower, darker. This was not the announcement of an ordinary alpha. This was the announcement of the king. The air changed the moment he stepped through the doors. It was like the pressure drop before a lightning strike. That breathless, electric stillness when the storm has already decided what it's going to destroy, and all you can do is wait for the impact. The remaining women turned to stone. The guards gripped their spears with white knuckles. Even the elders, ancient wolves who had seen 100 ceremonies, seemed to stop breathing. King Theron Nightshade walked into the great hall. I had only heard stories, whispered ones. Monster, they called him. A war king who had seized the throne at 18 in a bloodbath that lasted 3 days. An alpha so dominant that other alphas bowed without question. His wolf, massive, black as midnight eyes like liquid gold. They said he had never chosen a mate because no woman was strong enough to stand beside him. He wasn't wearing armor like the other alphas. He wore a long black robe embroidered with silver runes that shimmered in the torchlight. His dark hair fell loose over his shoulders, wild, untamed. His jaw was hard and bearded, and over his eyes was a blindfold of black velvet. But it wasn't his appearance that hit me. It was his presence. He didn't fill the room physically, though he stood well over 6 feet. He filled it energetically. Every step echoed through the hall like a thunderclap. The air felt denser around him, heavier, as though gravity bent in his direction, and his scent. Even I, who had never processed scent the way others did, could feel it. It wasn't perfume or soap. It was raw alpha so intense it crossed the line between smell and sensation. Dark forests, smoke, iron, danger, power, and beneath all of that, something wild, ungoverned, something that made my neglected wolf whimper in the back of my chest. Run, instinct whispered. Run before he reaches you. But I couldn't move. Theron stopped at the start of the line. He inhaled slowly, deeply, nostrils flaring. Something like discomfort crossed his face, a tightness around his mouth, a faint wince. Then he began to walk. He passed the first woman, a tall warrior with flame-red hair, who had layered on so much perfume I could see her from across the room. He inhaled, frowned, moved on. The second, the third. With each woman, his jaw tightened, his shoulders tensed. It was as though every scent physically pained him like nails dragged across stone. He reached the blonde Omega beside me, the one who smelled of lilac sweet and inviting. She trembled as he leaned toward her. He inhaled and flinched back as though she had struck him. "Too much," he murmured. His voice was deep and rough like gravel dragged over iron. "Everything is too much." He passed her without a second glance. One woman left between us, then none. He stopped in front of me. The world stopped turning. I could feel his attention like a physical weight, heavy, suffocating, inescapable. He was close enough that I could feel the heat coming off his body, close enough to hear the faint creak of his leather boots as he shifted his weight. He breathed in. I braced for it. The disgust, the dismissal, the footsteps moving on. But nothing happened. He simply stood there. 5 seconds. 10. 20. The silence in the hall was deafening. Theron tilted his head just slightly like a predator that had heard something unexpected, something it didn't understand. Then he leaned forward, not toward my throat where every other alpha had searched for scent. No, he leaned toward my chest, toward my heart, and he listened, found he breathed. The word was barely a whisper, but it rang through the hall like a bell struck at midnight. I was certain I had misheard him. Theron straightened slowly. His fingers, large and scarred, reached for the blindfold and pulled it away in one fluid motion. His eyes were gold, not amber like most wolves. Real gold, liquid, luminous, glowing like molten metal catching sunlight. The pupils were blown wide, feral, something ancient and animal pressing toward the surface. He stared at me as though seeing me for the first time and recognizing me from a lifetime before. "You," he murmured, voice rough and barely controlled. "You are the one." "Your Majesty?" The ceremony master interrupted, voice trembling. "This woman, she is marked defective. She has no scent. She is quiet. One word." But it landed with such force that the old man stopped mid-sentence and stepped back, head lowered. Theron didn't look away from me. His eyes held mine like a trap. Not an unpleasant one, but a trap nonetheless. "You have no scent," he said. A statement, not a question. I nodded. My throat was locked shut. "Good. I found my voice. Barely. I don't understand." He stepped closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to look at him. He was enormous, overwhelming, and yet strangely I felt no fear of him, only of everything surrounding this moment. "All night," he said quietly, "I walked down this line, and all night every scent was agony. Perfumes, oils, pheromones, all of it screaming at me, clawing at my senses. My wolf couldn't bear it." He raised one hand slowly, carefully, as though afraid of startling me. His fingers hovered near my cheek but didn't touch. "Every woman smelled of desperation," he continued, "of performance, of trying to be something she wasn't." He paused, searching for the word. "And then I reached you, and there was nothing. No perfume, no masks, no lies. Just..." He exhaled. Silence. The word hit me like a fist to the chest. I had spent my entire life treating that silence as a curse, as proof I was broken, incomplete, worthless. But the way he said it, silence, it sounded like something sacred. And then I heard it. He continued, his voice dropping lower. "Your heartbeat." His hand finally made contact, gently, pressing against my chest, over my heart. It was beating in the same rhythm as mine. Instinctively, without thinking, my hand rose to his chest. I could feel it through the heavy fabric of his robe. Thud, 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 thud. Perfect, synchronized, Identical. You see, he whispered. A slow, tentative smile crossed his lips, the first I had seen from him. It softened his face, made him look younger, less like a war king, and more like a man who had been searching for something his entire life and had finally impossibly found it. You are not broken, Omega, he said softly. You are the only thing here that isn't. The tears I had been holding back all night finally broke through, hot and silent, running down my face in rivers I couldn't stop. What is your name? He asked. Kira, I whispered. Kira Ashwood. Kira. He said it like he was tasting it, like it mattered. I do not choose you, despite your silence, he said. I choose you because of it. You are the stillness inside my storm, the only thing that has ever made my wolf go quiet. The hall erupted. Shocked voices, outraged murmurs. She has no scent. This is against tradition. She is defective. Theron turned, slowly. His golden eyes blazed like twin suns. A low, resonant growl rolled out of his chest, so deep the floor vibrated beneath our feet, so powerful that even the elders' men who had ruled for decades took a step back. Silence. The hall obeyed. He faced them slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was cold and absolute. You call her defective. You call her broken. But you are the blind ones. He let that land. Let it sink into their bones. Your traditions taught you that mates are found through scent. But what about the other senses? What about sound, rhythm, resonance? What about the beat of a heart that matches your own? Not a single person spoke. Theron turned back to me and extended his hand. Kira of Ashwood. I, King. Theron Nightshade, choose you as my mate, as my queen, not despite your nature but because of it. Will you have me? The world held its breath. Every rational thought I had screamed at me. This is madness. He is a king. You are nobody. This cannot be real. But my heart, the heart beating in perfect time with his, already knew the answer. I took his hand. Yes, I whispered. I will have you. His fingers closed around mine, firm, certain, warm. He pulled me forward, lifted me effortlessly into his arms and carried me out of the line, out of the row of the forgotten, into a life I had never dared to imagine. He didn't take me to a waiting room. He didn't hand me off to attendants or servants who would prepare me, dress me, make me presentable for the court. No. King Theron Nightshade carried me directly to his chambers, the royal rooms at the top of the northern tower high above the city, where the air was thin and cold and the silence was absolute. The doors closed behind us. Heavy oak, a full hand's width thick, reinforced with iron bands that had been forged a century ago. The sound of them shutting was final, conclusive. We were alone. Theron set me down gently. My feet sank into dark carpet woven from wool so thick it felt like walking on moss. I looked around slowly, trying to process where I was, what had just happened, what any of this meant. The room was vast. High ceilings supported by massive wooden beams. Walls lined floor to ceiling with books, hundreds of them, their leather spines cracked and faded. A fireplace large enough to stand in, filled with logs that crackled and hissed, casting dancing shadows across the stone. And in the center a bed, enormous, canopied with midnight blue silk that hung in heavy folds. And everywhere quiet. The windows were thick, triple-paned glass set deep into frames packed with wool and wax. No city noise penetrated, no distant voices, no wind. It felt cut off from the world entirely, like a pocket of space that existed outside of time. It's so quiet in here, I murmured. Theron stood with his back to me, hands braced against a heavy wooden dresser. His shoulders were tight. His breathing was labored, uneven, as though he had just run a great distance. I had this room built specifically, he said quietly. Double walls, triple glass, everything designed to keep the noise out. He turned slowly. His golden eyes found mine, and in them I saw something I hadn't expected, something that made my chest tighten. Exhaustion. Vulnerability. Pain. Do you know what it is? Like? He began. His voice was rough, strained. When every sound hits like a hammer, when every scent turns your stomach, when other people's emotions press down on you like stones piled on your chest until you cannot breathe. He moved closer. The shadows under his eyes were deep dark as bruises. I hadn't noticed them before in the chaos of the great hall, but here in the firelight they were unmistakable. "My wolf is too powerful," he continued. "Too sensitive. I can hear every whisper, every heartbeat, every breath within 500 paces. I cannot turn it off. I cannot rest." His voice cracked. Barely. But I heard it. Even in sleep, the chaos follows me. I dream in screams, in thunderous footsteps, in 1,000 voices speaking at once, until I wake choking on silence I can never find. He was standing in front of me now, close enough that I could see the individual threads of silver in his dark beard, close enough to see the faint scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. "I have tried everything," he said. "Healers, witches, herbalists who traveled from kingdoms a month's ride away. They all said the same thing. My wolf is too dominant, too strong. I would never find peace." A bitter laugh escaped him. "I thought I was cursed to be alone. I could not tolerate a woman near me for more than 5 minutes. Their scents, their voices, their emotions bleeding into mine. It was unbearable." His hand rose slowly, carefully, and touched my cheek. "And then I found you," he whispered. "A woman with no scent, no performance, no noise. Just you. And when I stood beside you," he exhaled long and slow, "my wolf lay down for the first time in 11 years. There was silence in my head. Real silence, the kind I thought I would never know again. Tears blurred my vision. I had spent my entire life believing my emptiness was a defect, a flaw so fundamental it made me less than whole. But for him, I was exactly what he needed, the absence he had been searching for. "The court will never accept this," I said quietly. "The elders, the council, they think I am broken. Then they are wrong." His voice shifted, harder, royal, final. "And they will learn to respect you. You are my choice, my queen. Anyone who questions that answers to me." He drew me closer until there was no space left between us. I felt his heartbeat against my chest, steady and strong, perfectly matched to mine. That, he said softly, is our bond. Not made through scent, made through resonance, through harmony, through something deeper than instinct. He tilted his head down until his forehead nearly touched mine. "We were made for each other, Kira, not despite our differences, because of them." Then he kissed me. It wasn't gentle, it was hungry, desperate, like a man who had been starving and finally remembered what food was. His hands found my hair, fingers tangling, holding me like I might disappear if he let go. And something in me that had been locked closed for years, something I hadn't even known was there, simply opened. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. "You are mine," he growled. His eyes were blazing gold. His wolf was right at the surface, pressing against the edges of his control. "Say it." "I'm yours," I whispered. And for the first time in my life, those words didn't feel like surrender. They felt like freedom. We didn't sleep that night. We sat by the fire wrapped in furs and we talked, really talked. He told me about his father, the old king, a man who had been strong but distant, who had loved his kingdom more than his son. He told me about the day his father was killed, not in battle, not honorably, but poisoned, betrayed by someone close, someone trusted. Theron had been 18, barely a man, and in the chaos that followed, the council had tried to seize control. They wanted a puppet king, a boy they could manipulate. Instead, they got a war. Theron hunted down every conspirator, every alpha who had conspired to weaken the throne. It took 3 days, 72 hours of blood and fire and screaming. When it was over, the council was half its original size, and no one ever questioned his authority again. But the cost, he said, quietly staring into the flames, was my peace. The curse came after. A witch from the Raven clan. Her family had supported the conspirators. When I executed her brother, she cursed me. She said, "Your power will grow until it devours you. The stronger you become, the more alone you will be." He looked at me. For 11 years, it has been true. Every year my senses sharpened. Every year the world grew louder, more overwhelming. I thought I would go mad. Until tonight. I reached for his hand. It was large, scarred, calloused from years of holding a sword, but when he held mine, he was gentle. I told him about my father, about watching him die inside long before the wolves tore him apart, about my mother's grief turning to resentment, about Garrick, about becoming invisible in my own home. And I told him about the maps, 89 of them, every escape route I had planned, every trail I had memorized, every night I had spent imagining running into the wilderness and never coming back. I was going to leave tonight, I admitted. If no one chose me, I was going to disappear. Theron's grip tightened. I am grateful you did not, he said, because I would have spent the rest of my life searching for a silence I had only heard once. The fire burned low. The first light of dawn crept through the heavy curtains, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt safe. But safety, I would learn, was temporary. The knock came 3 hours after sunrise. Sharp. Insistent. I was still in Theron's chambers, wrapped in one of his robes, my hair loose and tangled. He answered the door himself, opening it just wide enough to see who stood outside. Elder Draven Ironwood. I recognized him immediately. Tall, lean, with silver hair, pulled back in a severe knot. His face was all sharp angles and cold eyes. He had been on the council for 30 years, longer than Theron had been alive. Your Majesty, Draven said. His voice was smooth, polite, and utterly devoid of warmth. The council requests your presence. There are matters that require immediate attention. Theron didn't move. It can wait. I am afraid it cannot. Draven's eyes slid past Theron, landing on me. His expression didn't change, but I felt the weight of his judgment like a physical blow. The matter concerns your choice last night. The council has concerns. Of course they do, Theron said flatly. He turned to me. Stay here. I will return shortly. But I saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened. He didn't want to leave. He knew what was coming. The door closed. I was alone. I should have stayed in the room. I should have trusted him to handle it. But I had spent my entire life being handled, being managed, being told where to stand and when to speak and how to make myself smaller. I was done with that. I dressed quickly in the clothes I had worn the night before, the simple white gown from the ceremony now wrinkled and creased. I braided my hair back, washed my face in the basin by the window, and slipped out into the corridor. The royal wing was a maze of stone hallways and narrow staircases, but I had always been good at observation, good at remembering. I followed the sound of voices, distant, muffled, coming from somewhere below. I descended 3 flights of stairs and found myself in a long gallery lined with portraits of dead kings. At the far end, a set of double doors stood partially open. Light spilled through the gap. And voices. Angry ones. I moved closer, pressed myself against the wall, and listened. This is unacceptable, a voice said. Elder Draven, Your Majesty, we understand your position, but tradition cannot be ignored. A queen without scent is a queen without legitimacy. She has legitimacy because I have chosen her Theron's voice, cold, controlled, dangerous. With respect, Draven continued, your choice is clouded by your condition. You are drawn to her because she does not trigger your sensitivities. That is not a foundation for a royal union. Another voice joined in. Elder Matthias, I thought. Older, rougher. The people will not accept her. The Pax will see it as weakness. A king who chooses a defective Omega is a king who has lost his way. Silence, long and heavy. When Theron spoke again, his voice was quiet. Too quiet. You will not speak of her that way again. Your Majesty. I said. Theron continued each word, sharp as a blade. You will not speak of her that way again. She is my chosen queen. She will be crowned, and anyone who questions that will answer to me personally. We are not questioning your authority, Draven said smoothly. We are protecting it, which is why we propose a compromise. My blood ran cold. 3 trials, Draven said. Traditional tests of worthiness. If she passes the council, we'll support her coronation without objection. If she fails, he left the sentence unfinished. And if I refuse, Theron asked, then the council will have no choice but to declare the union invalid. We have the authority, Your Majesty. The old laws are clear. A king's choice can be challenged if the council unanimously agrees the chosen is unfit. I heard something shift, a chair scraping, footsteps. You would challenge me. Theron's voice was soft, lethal. We would protect the kingdom, Draven replied, even from you if necessary. The silence that followed felt like the moment before an avalanche, like the world holding its breath before it collapsed. Then Theron laughed. Short, sharp, humorless. 3 trials, he said. Fine. Propose them. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I turned and ran back the way I had come, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. I made it back to Theron's chambers just as the door at the end of the corridor opened and footsteps echoed down the hall. I was sitting by the fire pretending to read one of his books when he entered. He looked at me, really looked, and I knew immediately that he knew I had been listening. You heard, he said. I nodded. He crossed the room and knelt in front of me, took my hands in his. I will not let them do this to you. I have to, I said quietly. If I do not, they will never stop. They will undermine you, undermine us. This is the only way. Theron's jaw tightened. The trials are designed to make you fail. Then I will not fail. He stared at me, and slowly something shifted in his expression. Surprise, respect, maybe even pride. You do not have to prove yourself to them, he said. I smiled, sad, tired. Yes, I do, because if I do not, I will spend the rest of my life wondering if I deserved this, if I deserved you. His hands tightened around mine. You deserve more than this world has ever given you. Then let me earn it. He pulled me close, pressed his forehead against mine, and we sat like that for a long time. 2 people who had spent their lives alone finally finding each other and knowing that the hardest part was still ahead. The council gathered that afternoon to announce the trials formally. I stood beside Theron in the great hall, the same hall where he had chosen me less than 24 hours ago. But now it felt different, colder, more hostile. Elder Draven stepped forward, unrolling a scroll of parchment. By the authority granted to this council under the old laws, he read aloud, we propose 3 trials to determine the worthiness of Kira Ashwood to stand as Queen of Noctara. He paused, looked directly at me. First trial. The Northern Ridge and Shadow Vale packs are on the brink of war over disputed hunting grounds. You will travel to the border and negotiate peace. You have 1 week. Second trial. The Kingdom of Frostvale in the north has refused all diplomatic contact for 5 years. You will secure a treaty. You have 1 week. Third trial. You will journey to the Forbidden Forest and retrieve the celestial compass from the Moonstone altar. You have 1 week. He rolled up the scroll. Fail any trial and the union will be declared void. The hall was silent, every eye on me, waiting for me to break, to beg, to refuse. I stepped forward. I accept. Draven's eyes narrowed. He had expected fear. Instead, he got defiance. Theron leaned close, his voice low enough that only I could hear. You do not have to do this alone. I will come with you. I turned to him, smiled. No, this is my trial. I need to prove I can stand on my own. His expression was conflicted, torn between wanting to protect me and respecting my choice. Finally, he nodded. Then I will wait. And when you return, we will crown you together. I left the capital the next morning on horseback, accompanied only by a small pack of supplies and a map I had drawn myself. The first trial awaited me 180 miles to the north, where 2 wolf packs were ready to tear each other apart, and I had 7 days to stop them. But as I rode through the gates of the city, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. Sarah. My sister stood there dressed in traveling clothes, a pack slung over her shoulder. I'm coming with you, she said. Why? Because, she said quietly, I have been a coward my entire life, and I am tired of it. For the first time in years, I saw my sister clearly, not as the girl who had abandoned me, but as someone who was trying, however late, to make things right. I nodded. Then let's go. And we rode north together toward a war I had to stop with nothing but words and the hope that maybe, just maybe, silence could be louder than swords. The road north was brutal. Was 3 days of riding through terrain that grew progressively more hostile with every mile. The forests of the lowlands gave way to rocky hills, then to steep mountain passes where the wind cut like knives and the temperature dropped until our breath came out in white clouds. Sarah rode beside me in silence for the first day. We had spent so many years avoiding each other that conversation felt like a foreign language neither of us remembered how to speak. But on the second night, as we huddled around a small fire in a shallow cave, she finally broke. "I took 500 gold coins," she said quietly. Her eyes were fixed on the flames. "Elder Draven paid me to tell him everything about you. Your routines, your habits, where you slept, what you did with your time." I said nothing, just waited. "He wanted to know if you were dangerous," she continued. "If you had ambitions, if you might try to, I don't know, seduce an alpha, manipulate someone into choosing you." She laughed, bitter, sharp, as if anyone would choose you. That's what I thought. That's what I told him. She's nothing. She's broken. She'll be rejected and forgotten, and then this will all be over. Her voice cracked. "I didn't know he would use it against you. I didn't know about the trials. I wanted the money. I wanted to secure my future. And I told myself you would never know, that it wouldn't matter." The fire popped. Sparks drifted up into the darkness. "But then he chose you," Sarah whispered. "The king himself." And I realized what I had done. I had sold my sister for 500 coins and a chance at a comfortable life. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were red. "I am so sorry, Kira. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I had to say it." I stared at her for a long time. Part of me wanted to rage, to scream, to tell her exactly how much her betrayal had cost me, how many nights I had spent believing I was worthless because even my own family couldn't bear to acknowledge me. But another part of me, the part that had learned to survive by letting go, understood something simpler. She was here now. "You're right," I said quietly. "It doesn't fix anything." Sarah flinched. "But you're here," I continued. "You could have stayed in the capital, you could have hidden, but you came, so we start from here." I held out my hand. "Help me stop a war. Then we'll talk about forgiveness." Sarah stared at my hand for a long moment. Then she took it. We reached the border on the afternoon of the third day. The disputed territory was a narrow valley wedged between two mountain ranges thick with pine and cedar, rich with deer and elk. Prime hunting ground. Worth fighting for. Worth dying for, apparently. The northern ridge pack had set up camp on the western side of the valley. 40 wolves, maybe 50, their tents arranged in military precision. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Guards patrolled the perimeter with spears and bows. The Shadow Veil pack held the eastern side. Slightly smaller, maybe 35 wolves, but their camp was positioned on higher ground, giving them a tactical advantage. Between them, a stretch of open ground maybe 300 paces wide. No man's land. The killing field. We approached from the south following a deer trail that kept us out of sight until we were close enough to be seen. Then I dismounted, raised both hands, and walked into the open. Sarah hissed behind me. "What are you doing?" "Announcing myself," I said. "If I sneak in, they'll think I'm a spy." Within seconds, I heard the whistle of arrows being nocked, the scrape of steel being drawn, shouts in 2 different directions. "Hold, identify yourself." I kept walking, hands high, steady pace. My heart was hammering, but I kept my breathing even. "My name is Kira Ashwood," I called out. "I am here on behalf of King Theron Nightshade. I have been sent to negotiate peace." A long silence. Then a voice from the western camp. "Northern Ridge does not recognize the authority of the crown in this matter. This is pack business, and Shadow Veil does not bow to a king who chooses a broken Omega as his queen." Another voice shouted from the east. I stopped in the center of the clearing, turned slowly so both camps could see me clearly. "Then do not bow to the king," I said. "Bow to logic." That got their attention. I lowered my hands. You have been fighting over this valley for 3 months. 6 of your wolves are dead. 15 are wounded. Winter is coming, and you are spending your time, your resources, and your lives arguing over who has the right to hunt deer. I let that sink in. Meanwhile, your families are hungry. Your children are cold, and both of your packs are weaker than you were 3 months ago. I pointed west. Northern Ridge, you are strong. You have numbers, but your territory is overhunted. You need this valley or your people will starve before spring. Then I pointed east. Shadow Vale, you are strategic. You have the high ground, but you are outnumbered 2 to 1. If this turns into a full war, you will lose. I lowered my hand. So here is what I propose. You share the valley. Northern Ridge hunts Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Shadow Vale hunts Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Sunday, no one hunts. The deer recover. The valley stays rich. You split the yield 60-40. Northern Ridge gets 60 because you have more mouths to feed. Shadow Vale gets 40 because you control the high ground and could make this very expensive for Northern Ridge if you wanted to. I crossed my arms. Or you can keep fighting. Keep dying. Keep weakening yourselves while winter comes and your children starve. Your choice. Silence. Then from the western camp a figure emerged. A massive alpha easily 6.5 feet tall with a beard like iron wire and shoulders broad enough to carry a tree. He walked toward me slowly, stopping about 20 paces away. You are the Omega without scent, he said. His voice was deep gravelly. I am. He studied me for a long moment. They say you are broken. They say a lot of things. A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. What is your stake in this, Omega? Why does the King's Chosen care about a border dispute between 2 packs? Because I said simply, if I cannot stop 2 packs from killing each other over hunting grounds, I have no business being queen. He nodded slowly. From the eastern camp another figure approached. A woman this time smaller but no less commanding. Alpha Marin of Shadow Vale. She had scars across her face, a missing ear, and eyes like chips of flint. 60-40, she said flatly. That is the deal. That is the deal. And if Northern Ridge breaks the agreement, then Shadow Vale has the right to reclaim their 40% by force, I said, and I will personally ensure the crown backs you. Marin looked at the Northern Ridge Alpha. Do you agree to this? Torvin was quiet for a long time. Then he spat on the ground. I agree. Marin did the same. Then it is done. They didn't shake hands. They didn't embrace. They simply turned and walked back to their respective camps. But the tension that had hung over the valley like a storm cloud began to lift. Sarah appeared at my side, eyes wide. How did you know that would work? I didn't, I admitted. But I know what it is like to be desperate. And desperate people do not need grand gestures. They need practical solutions. We stayed that night with the Northern Ridge Pack. Torvin offered us his tent food and ale. We ate venison stew and hard bread, and I listened as Torvin told me about his pack, about the hard winter 2 years ago when half their children had died of starvation, about the shame of not being able to provide. You gave me a way to feed my people without losing face, he said quietly. That is worth more than pride. The next morning we rode south, 1 trial down, 2 to go. But as we left the valley, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Sarah saw it too. Kira, she whispered, look. On the ridge above Shadow Vale's camp, barely visible against the gray stone, stood a figure, watching. When he saw us looking, he turned and disappeared into the trees. But I had seen enough. The black cloak, the silver clasp shaped like a raven. Someone from the council was here. Someone had been watching, and they would report back to Draven that I had succeeded, which meant the next trial would be harder. We returned to the capital briefly to resupply. I had 4 days left before the second trial deadline, 4 days to somehow convince a reclusive king who had shut his borders for 5 years to open diplomatic relations. Theron was waiting for me when I arrived. He met me at the gates, pulled me into his arms, and held me so tightly I could barely breathe. I heard about the border, he murmured into my hair. Torven sent word. You did it. One down, I said. He pulled back, held my face in his hands. You do not have to do the next one. We can fight the council. I can. No, I interrupted. I finished this. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. That night I studied everything I could find about Frostvale. It was a kingdom to the far north, beyond the great pine forests where the ground was frozen 9 months of the year and the sun barely rose in winter. Their King Aldrich had closed the borders after his wife died in childbirth 5 years ago. No trade, no visitors, no exceptions. Every diplomat who had tried to make contact had been turned away at the border. Some had been threatened. One had been killed. This was not a negotiation. This was a suicide mission, and the council knew it. I left 2 days later, alone. Theron had wanted to send guards and escort a full diplomatic envoy. I refused. If Aldrich hated outsiders, showing up with an army would guarantee failure. The ride north took 5 days. The landscape changed dramatically. The forests grew darker, thicker, the trees so tall they blocked out the sky. The temperature dropped until frost covered everything, even in midday. I crossed the border into Frostvale on the morning of the 6th day. There were no guards, no checkpoints, just a stone marker carved with a simple warning in 3 languages. Turn back. Death awaits the unwelcome. I kept riding. 3 hours later I was surrounded. They came out of the trees like ghosts. 20 wolves, maybe more, all wearing gray cloaks that blended perfectly with the winter landscape. They didn't speak. They simply formed a circle around me, weapons drawn. I dismounted slowly, raised my hands. My name is Kira Ashwood, I said. I seek an audience with King Aldrich. One of the wolves stepped forward, a woman with white blonde hair and eyes like ice. King Aldrich does not grant audiences. Then tell him I am the Omega without scent, I said. And I have come because I am the only person in the realm who will not make him sick. The woman's eyes narrowed. What did you say? Your king suffers from the same condition as mine, I said quietly. He is overwhelmed by scent, by sound, by the presence of others. That is why he closed the borders. That is why he cannot tolerate visitors. I took a step forward, but I have no scent. I will not trigger his condition, and I have information he needs to hear. The wolves exchanged glances. Then the woman made a sharp gesture. Bind her hands. Bring her to the hall. They tied my wrists with rough rope and led me deeper into the forest. After an hour, we reached a fortress built into the side of a mountain. It was carved directly from the stone, ancient and imposing, with narrow windows and a single iron gate. Inside, the air was cold and still. The walls were bare. No tapestries, no decorations, nothing that might hold scent or sound. They brought me to a great hall that was eerily similar to Theron's chambers, sparse, silent, designed for isolation. And at the far end, sitting on a throne of carved ice, was King Aldrich. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40. His face was gaunt, his hair prematurely gray, his eyes sunken and ringed with dark circles. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in years. He watched me approach with suspicion and something else. Curiosity. You claim to have no scent, he said. His voice was soft, barely above a whisper. I do. Prove it. I walked forward until I was standing directly in front of him, close enough to touch. He leaned forward, inhaled deeply. His eyes widened. Nothing he breathed. You are empty. I am silent, I corrected gently. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he laughed. A broken, desperate sound. 20 years, he said. 20 years I have suffered. And in 20 years, you are the first person I have been able to stand within arm's reach of. He stood abruptly. Why are you here? Because someone tried to poison you, I said bluntly. 3 years ago. A man named Draven Ironwood. He wanted to destabilize Frostvale so he could control the silver trade routes that run through your territory. Aldrich's expression went cold. How do you know this? Because he is trying to do the same thing to my king, I said, and I need your help to stop him. I spent the next hour telling him everything. About Draven, about the council, about the trials designed to make me fail. about the corruption that had festered for years. When I finished, Aldrich was silent for a long time. Then he walked to a desk, and pulled out a sealed letter. "This is a treaty," he said. "Trade rights. Open borders. Mutual defense. I wrote it 5 years ago, intending to send it to King Theron's father, but he was killed before I could. He held it out to me. I will honor this treaty with King Theron, but only if you give me your word that you will destroy the man who poisoned me." I took the letter. "You have my word." Aldrich nodded slowly. "Then go, and when you burn Draven's world to the ground, know that Frostvale stands with you." I left the fortress with the treaty in hand, my heart pounding, my mind racing. 2 trials down, 1 to go. But as I rode south, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was still ahead, because the 3rd trial wasn't about negotiation or diplomacy. It was about surviving the Forbidden Forest and breaking the curse that had haunted Theron for 11 years. I returned to the capital with the treaty sealed and signed, delivered it directly to Theron's hands, and watched the relief flood his face. 2 trials completed with 5 days to spare. The council had been silent, their expressions unreadable, but I could feel their frustration like heat radiating from stone. Elder Draven stood before the throne, jaw tight, eyes cold. "The 3rd trial remains," he said flatly, "and the deadline stands. 7 days from today, you must retrieve the celestial compass from the Moonstone altar in the Forbidden Forest. Fail, and the union is void." I knew what he wasn't saying. The Forbidden Forest had killed stronger wolves than me. It was a place where reality bent, where the trees whispered madness, where wolves entered and never returned. The Moonstone altar sat at its heart 65 miles deep, protected by ancient magic that had stood for 1,000 years. This wasn't a trial. It was an execution with extra steps. But there was something else. Something Draven didn't know I knew. The curse on Theron could only be broken at the Moonstone altar, and I intended to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. "I have a condition," I said. The council members shifted. Draven's eyebrow rose. "You are not in a position to make conditions." "I am," I replied calmly, "because you need me to fail, and I need something from that forest. So here is my condition. King Theron accompanies me." "Absolutely not," Draven snapped. "The trials are yours alone." The terms said I must retrieve the compass, I countered. They said nothing about going alone. And since the king's condition makes him unable to tolerate most company, and since I am the only person who does not trigger his affliction, his presence does not constitute help. It constitutes medical necessity. I let that land. Unless the council wishes to be responsible for the king's health deteriorating during my absence. Theron's lips twitched. Almost a smile. Draven's face darkened, but he was trapped. He gave a curt nod. "Fine, but you have 7 days, not 1 hour more." But before I could leave for the Forbidden Forest, Draven made one final move. The attack came on my 2nd night back in the capital. I was alone in the archives, studying maps of the Forbidden Forest by candlelight. Theron was in council meetings. Sarah was visiting the healer's quarter. The library was silent except for the scratch of my pen on parchment. I didn't hear them approach. 4 shadows moving like smoke between the shelves. The first blade came for my throat. I threw myself sideways, crashed into a bookshelf. Books rained down. I grabbed one thick and leather-bound, used it to block the second strike. The knife punched through the cover, stopped inches from my face. I ran, through the stacks toward the main doors, but they were faster. They cut me off, herded me deeper into the archives toward the old vaults where no one would hear me scream. A blade slashed across my shoulder. Pain bloomed hot and sharp. Blood soaked through my sleeve. I knew these passages. I had mapped them weeks ago, preparing to run. I ducked into a narrow corridor, one of the old servant routes barely wide enough for one person. The assassins followed, but I knew something they didn't. 20 paces ahead, the floor dropped away. A storage shaft 15 feet deep, used centuries ago to move supplies between floors. I had marked it on my map. Dangerous. Avoidable. I ran faster. At the last second I jumped, caught the opposite edge, pulled myself up. Behind me the first assassin couldn't stop. He fell, hit the bottom with a sickening crack. The other 3 hesitated. That was all I needed. I burst through a side door into the main hall. Guards turned, saw the blood, the drawn weapons. Assassins! I screamed. In the archives, the guards moved. The assassins fled. 2 were captured. 1 escaped. But then I heard it. The sound that made my blood freeze. A roar. Theron's roar. And the clash of steel. He had arrived in the middle of the fight. The last assassin had circled back, blade raised. I was cornered, wounded, weaponless. He lunged. Theron hit him like a battering ram. They went down together, rolled across the stone floor. I saw the flash of steel, heard Theron's roar of pain. The assassin's blade had found its mark. Deep in Theron's shoulder, right where the collarbone met muscle, blood poured dark and fast. Theron didn't stop. Even wounded, even bleeding, he was a force of nature. He broke the assassin's arm, slammed his head against the floor until the man went limp. Then he collapsed. No, I breathed. No, no, no. I crawled to him, pressed my hands against the wound. Blood welled between my fingers, hot and slick. Too much blood. Stay with me, I begged. Theron, stay with me. His eyes were unfocused, glazed. The blade had been poisoned, I realized. Not meant to kill immediately, meant to weaken, to incapacitate. I tore strips from my dress, tied them tight around his shoulder. The bleeding slowed but didn't stop. I needed herbs, antidotes, things I had learned from my grandmother's books but never practiced. Help, I screamed. Someone help! Guards came running. Healers followed. But I didn't let go of Theron's hand. His heartbeat was slowing, losing its rhythm, no longer synchronized with mine. No, I whispered. You don't get to leave me. Not now. Not like this. I pressed my forehead against his, focused on my own heartbeat. Steady. Strong. And I pushed. It wasn't magic. Not really. Just will. Just desperation. Just the bond we had forged in silence and synchronized hearts. His heartbeat stuttered. Caught. Found my rhythm again. Together. The healers took over. They carried him to his chambers, worked through the night, extracting poison, stitching wounds, fighting infection. I never left his side. While the healers worked, Sarah burst into the chamber. Her face was flushed, eyes bright with something between triumph and terror. I found it, she gasped. The proof we need. She dropped a leather-bound ledger on the table. She had been searching for it for weeks, ever since I told her about the corruption. But finding it had been dangerous. She had broken into Draven's estate, bypassed guards, picked locks, all while I was being attacked. He knows, Sarah said. Draven knows we're onto him. The assassination attempt. It was a distraction. He wanted me caught while I was searching, but I was faster. She looked at my shoulder, at the blood seeping through the bandage. I'm sorry. If I had been there, you would be dead, I interrupted. You did what needed to be done. We both did. When Theron finally woke 3 days later, his first words were, You saved me. Again. I smiled through tears. We're even now. We left for the Forbidden Forest the next morning. Theron, myself, Sarah, and 3 of Theron's most trusted warriors. Commander Royce, a grizzled veteran with a scar across his throat. Maven, a tracker who could read signs in stone. And young Finn, barely 20, but loyal to his core. The journey to the forest's edge took 2 days. We rode hard, speaking little, conserving energy. On the night before we entered, Theron pulled me aside. We stood at the tree line, staring into the darkness between the ancient pines. Even from here, the forest felt wrong. The air was too still, the silence too complete. No birds, no insects, nothing. There are stories about this place, Theron said quietly. They say the forest shows you your deepest fear, that it takes the shape of what will break you. Then it will have a hard time with me, I said. I have already been broken. He turned to me, cupped my face in his hands. Promise me something, anything. If it comes down to choosing between the compass and your life, choose your life. Let the council win. We will find another way. I covered his hands with mine. I promise. It was a lie. We both knew it. But he kissed me anyway, long and deep, like a man saying goodbye. We entered the Forbidden Forest at dawn. The change was immediate. The moment we crossed the boundary, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. The light turned gray and flat as though filtered through dirty water. And the silence. The silence was absolute, not peaceful, predatory. Maven led the way, reading signs I couldn't see. We walked for hours, the trees growing taller and closer together until the sky disappeared completely. Time became meaningless. It could have been noon or midnight. There was no way to tell. On the second day, the forest began to play tricks. Finn saw his dead mother standing between two trees calling his name. He tried to run to her. Royce had to tackle him, hold him down while he screamed and wept. Maven heard wolves howling in the distance, always just out of sight, circling, getting closer. She drew her bow and spun in circles, loosing arrows at shadows that weren't there. Sarah saw our father, whole, alive, smiling. She walked toward him in a daze until I grabbed her arm and shook her hard. "It's not real," I hissed. "None of it is real." But her eyes were distant, glazed. Theron was the only one unaffected, or so I thought. But I noticed him wincing, pressing his hands to his ears, his breathing growing labored. "What do you hear?" I asked. "Everything," he whispered. "Every scream that has ever echoed in this forest. Every death, every moment of despair. It is all here, all at once, and I cannot shut it out." I took his hand. Our hearts beat as one, a rhythm only we could hear. "Listen to this instead," I said. "Just this." His breathing slowed. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. We pressed on. On the third day, we lost Maven. She simply vanished between one step and the next. One moment she was ahead of us, the next she was gone. We searched for hours, calling her name, but the forest swallowed sound like water swallowing stones. We had no choice but to continue. On the fourth day, we found the bodies, 3 of them half buried in moss and dead leaves, wolves who had come before us seeking the altar. Their eyes were open mouths frozen in silent screams. They had died of nothing physical, just fear. That night we made camp in a small clearing. We didn't light a fire, didn't dare. We huddled together in the darkness, taking turns keeping watch. During my watch I heard it. Kira, my name, whispered from the trees, my father's voice. I stood slowly, hand on the knife at my belt. He stepped out of the shadows, exactly as I remembered him, strong, whole, before the wolves tore him apart. "You were always my favorite," he said softly, "even when you were broken. I never stopped loving you." Tears blurred my vision. "You're not real," I whispered. "Does it matter?" He stepped closer. "You have spent your whole life alone, Kira, unloved, unwanted. Even now, even with a king at your side, you know the truth. You are not enough. You will never be enough." His face changed, shifted, became Theron. "You think I chose you because I love you. This false," Theron said. "I chose you because you are useful, because you do not hurt me." "That is not love, that is convenience." My chest tightened. Every insecurity I had ever buried came roaring to the surface. "When you fail, when you cannot retrieve the compass, I will discard you, and you will return to what you have always been. Nothing." I closed my eyes, breathed, and listened. Not to the voice, to the heartbeat. Theron's heartbeat. The real one. 20 paces behind me, steady and strong and perfectly synchronized with mine. I opened my eyes. "You are right," I said to the phantom. "I am not enough. I have never been enough. But I am not alone anymore, and that makes all the difference." The false Theron's face twisted in rage, then dissolved into shadow and smoke. When I turned, the real Theron was awake, watching me with those golden eyes. "You passed your test," he said quietly. We reached the moonstone altar on the afternoon of the 5th day. It stood in a clearing so perfectly circular it could only be unnatural. The altar itself was carved from a single piece of white stone that seemed to glow with its own internal light. Runes covered every surface, ancient script that predated the kingdom by centuries. And there, resting on top of the altar, was the celestial compass, a small bronze disc engraved with stars and cardinal directions, humming with barely contained magic. Also on the altar, a silver chalice filled with water so clear it looked like liquid light. Theron stared at the altar, his face pale. "This is where the curse was made," he said. "I can feel it. The magic here is old, powerful. Then this is where we break it, I replied. I stepped forward, but Sarah grabbed my arm. Wait, she said. Look. She pointed to the runes. I couldn't read them, but she had always been better with languages. It says, she squinted, to take from the altar you must give something of equal value. I looked at the compass, at Theron, at the chalice. The compass is what the council demands, I said slowly, but the chalice, that is what will break the curse. I cannot ask you to choose, Theron said immediately. You are not asking, I replied. I am choosing. I stepped up to the altar, placed both hands on the cold stone, and spoke clearly. I offer my silence in exchange for his peace. The altar flared with light, blinding, overwhelming. I felt something tear away from me, something fundamental that I hadn't even known was there. And in its place, something new flooded in. Sound, real sound. Not the muted, distant echo I had always experienced, but full, rich, overwhelming sound. I could hear the wind in the trees, the beating of hearts, the whisper of breath, the rustle of fabric, everything all at once. And scent, God's the scent. 1,000 smells crashed into me simultaneously. Earth and pine and moss and Theron's scent, dark forests and smoke, and something uniquely him that made my wolf surge forward in recognition. I gasped, staggered under the weight of it all. My senses, dormant for so long, now screamed with input I had never learned to filter. Theron caught me, and I buried my face in his chest, overwhelmed. But then I realized he was standing completely still, relaxed. His breathing was even. The tension that had lived in his shoulders for 11 years was gone. I looked up at him. His eyes were gold but clear, peaceful. It's quiet, he whispered, wonder in his voice. For the first time in 11 years, it's quiet. We had traded places. I now carried the burden he had borne, and he was free. I grabbed the chalice, drank the water inside. It tasted like starlight in winter mornings. The curse shattered like glass, the sound of it echoing through the forest. Then I took the compass. The forest released us, just like that. One moment we were surrounded by oppressive darkness, the next we were walking through normal woods under normal sky. We found Maven on the outskirts, alive but unconscious. She woke confused with no memory of the past 3 days. We made it back to the capital on the evening of the 7th day, exactly as the sun touched the horizon. The council was waiting. I walked into the great hall, exhausted, covered in dirt and dried blood and forest debris. But I was alive, and I was carrying the celestial compass. I placed it on the table in front of Elder Draven. 3 trials, I said. 3 successes. Do you have any more tests, or can we move forward? Draven stared at the compass. His face was expressionless, but I could see the rage in his eyes. Before he could speak, the doors at the far end of the hall opened. An old man entered, dressed in robes of deep blue embroidered with silver stars. Grand Elder Aldous of the High Alliance. I recognized him from descriptions. He was a legend, a man who had served the Alliance for 50 years, who had the authority to overrule any kingdom council. Behind him walked King Aldrich of Frostvale. I have come, Aldous announced, his voice carrying through the hall, to investigate reports of corruption within the Noctara Council. He looked directly at Draven. Reports that Elder Draven Ironwood has been embezzling silver mine revenue, bribing pack leaders, and conspiring to assassinate King Theron's father 11 years ago. The hall erupted. Draven stood face white with fury. This is absurd. Aldrich stepped forward, placed a document on the table. This is a signed confession from the assassin who administered the poison that killed King Theron's father. He names you as the one who hired him. In exchange for immunity, he has provided detailed records of your financial transactions over the past 15 years. Sarah stepped forward from the crowd, placed a leather-bound ledger beside Aldrich's document. And this is Elder Draven's private accounting book, she said clearly. It shows 200,000 gold coins siphoned from the royal mines over 11 years. I found it hidden in the wine cellar beneath his estate. The council members began to back away from Draven, distancing themselves. Draven's hand went to his belt, to the knife there. But Theron was faster. He was across the hall in 3 strides, his hand closing around Draven's wrist with crushing force. Do not, Theron said softly. Make this worse for yourself. The trial lasted 4 hours. The evidence was overwhelming. The ledger, the confession, testimony from Aldrich about the attempted poisoning, testimony from 12 Omegas who had been sold to distant packs with Draven taking a percentage of the sale price. The 2 assassins who had been captured sang like birds, naming Draven as the one who had hired them. They described in detail how he had paid them 300 gold coins each to kill me in the archives. When the verdict came, it was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Elder Aldous pronounced the sentence himself. Draven Ironwood, you are stripped of your title, your lands, and your position. You are sentenced to permanent exile in the northern tundra, where you will live out your remaining days in the cold and isolation you tried to impose on others. Your co-conspirators on the council? He gestured to 3 other elders who had remained silent throughout, are stripped of their positions and sentenced to 25 years of labor in the very mines they exploited. Draven was dragged from the hall, screaming threats and curses that echoed off the stone walls until the doors closed and silenced him forever. The coronation took place 1 week later. I stood in the same great hall where Theron had chosen me, but everything was different now. I wore a gown of midnight blue silk embroidered with silver thread that matched Theron's robes. On my head sat a crown of silver set with moonstones from the Forbidden Forest altar. Around my neck, visible to everyone, was Theron's claiming mark, and on my finger a ring carved from the same white stone as the altar. Theron stood beside me, no longer isolated, no longer burdened. He smiled more easily now, slept peacefully. The shadows under his eyes had faded. Elder Aldous performed the ceremony himself, placing the crown on my head with steady hands. By the authority of the High Alliance, he proclaimed, I name Kira Ashwood Queen of Noctara. May she rule with wisdom, strength, and the silence that brings peace. The hall erupted in cheers. That night, Theron and I stood on the balcony of our chambers, looking out over the city. Lights flickered in windows. Smoke rose from chimneys. Life continued peaceful and ordinary. How do you feel? He asked. About the trade we made, I considered the question. I could still hear everything, smell everything. It was overwhelming at times. But I was learning to filter, to focus, to find the silence within the noise. I feel, I said slowly, like I finally understand what it means to be whole. Not because I am perfect, but because I chose what I became. He pulled me close, rested his chin on top of my head. The council has proposed new laws, he said. The Voices Decree. It prohibits discrimination based on scent or lack thereof. It establishes a council of silent voices, 7 Omegas, who will advise on matters affecting those the old system left behind. I smiled. How many have applied? 1,340. My chest tightened. All those Omegas who had been invisible finally seeing a path forward. And the glass law, I asked. Passed unanimously, Theron said. Every Alpha in a leadership position must now publicly disclose their income and assets. Annual audits by Alliance inspectors, no exceptions. The changes were real, measurable, permanent. 6 months later, I stood on the same balcony, Theron's hand resting gently on my belly, where our first child grew. Do you think they'll have your gift? He asked. Or mine? I think they'll have both, I said. And they'll never be alone. 3 years after that, our second child was born, a daughter with Theron's golden eyes and a gift for reading emotions through touch. She could calm a crying infant with a single hand on their chest, could soothe wounded soldiers with nothing but her presence. We named her Lyra. 5 years later came our son Cade. He inherited Theron's hearing, but without the curse. He could hear heartbeats from across a room, could detect lies in the rhythm of a pulse, could find lost children by listening for their fear. And 12 years after my coronation, our youngest daughter was born. She came into the world silent, no scent, just like her mother. The healers looked worried. The midwife exchanged glances with Theron, but I smiled. Perfect, I whispered, holding her close. You are absolutely perfect. We named her Arya. She grew up in a kingdom that celebrated silence instead of fearing it. Children with unique gifts were treasured, not ostracized. The Council of Silent Voices had expanded to include all those the old system had deemed broken wolves without scent wolves who couldn't shift wolves with sensory sensitivities like Theron had suffered. 1,340 omegas applied in the first year alone. By the 10th year, that number had grown to 3,000. Sarah had married Commander Royce in a quiet ceremony by the river. She led the Queen's Guard, now fierce and loyal, protecting every Omega who came to the capital seeking sanctuary. She and Royce had 2 children of their own, and Sarah was a better mother than our own had ever been. The numbers told the story of our success. Suicide rates among Omegas dropped 87% in the first year. Trade with Frostvale increased by 230%. The kingdom's treasury grew by 42% once Draven's corruption was eliminated and the silver mines operated honestly. Crime in the capital dropped by 63%. Applications to join the Royal Guard increased by 200%, now that merit mattered more than bloodline. But the numbers I treasured most were simpler. 0 Omegas sold into slavery in 12 years. 0 executions for defective wolves. 0 children abandoned for being different. The laws Theron and I had passed were not just words on parchment. They were living, breathing change. 50 years later, Theron and I stood on that same balcony, our hair silver, our faces lined with age and laughter. Our children had children, and our grandchildren were starting families of their own. Arya, our youngest, now served as High Counselor, advising the next generation of leaders. She had never married, never felt the need. She had found her purpose in protecting others like her, and that was enough. Lyra ran the healing academies, teaching young wolves that different gifts were not disabilities, but strengths. Cade commanded the border forces, using his gift to detect threats before they materialized, to negotiate peace before violence erupted. Theron and I watched the sun set over Noctara, the city we had rebuilt together. The city that had once feared silence now celebrated it. Our heartbeats were slower now, aged, but still perfectly synchronized. Thud thud, thud thud, thud thud. Do you ever regret it? Theron asked softly. The trade you made, taking on my burden. I considered the question. For 50 years I had lived with heightened senses. I could smell lies, hear fear, feel the weight of emotions in the air. It was overwhelming at first, but I had learned to filter, to focus, to find the silence within the noise. Never, I said, because I didn't trade one curse for another. I traded your cage for my freedom, and in doing so, we both became whole. He kissed my temple, a gesture he had repeated 10,000 times in 50 years, and it still made my heart flutter. What do you hear now? I asked. He listened. To the city below, to our grandchildren playing in the gardens, to the wind in the trees. Hope, he said. I hear hope, and the sound of a world that finally learned to listen. When the bards sang of us in taverns and halls, they no longer sang of the night King Theron chose a broken Omega. They sang of the queen who chose herself, the queen who traded silence for sound, and found that true power was not in being heard above all others, but in making the world quiet enough to listen to the forgotten. They sang of heartbeats, synchronized across 50 years. They sang of a kingdom transformed by a woman who had no scent but changed everything. And they ended every ballad the same way. Love does not find its way through the nose. It finds its way through the heart. And the truest strength is not the loudest roar, but the courage to make silence heard.